welcome to the Design Feeling Fireside. We have been running these sessions every fortnight for the past couple of months now, since February. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the episodes that I tend to release the week before the Fireside. So some of you might have listened to the episode with Jane and Janice, our guests for today. If you have not, I can share a link to that interview with you in the chat as well, so you can listen to it after the session. Some really kind of useful nuggets there for both Jane and Janice that I learned from our chat with them. So today's session is going to be about just following on from that conversation. And if you haven't listened to the interview, that's totally cool as well, because I think there's a lot that we can talk about and even dig deeper into. And also things that you might have any questions about. So that's something we can explore as well. So let me just quickly introduce our guests to all of you. So our first guest is Janice Hannaway, and Janice is a user researcher who works with different government departments on helping to improve their products and services. And she has over 20 years working with people with complex needs and trauma. And also she's a psychodynamic therapist, a clinical supervisor, and also a certified emotional intelligence assessor. And I'm really glad to have her back in one of these Design Feeling Firesides. So thank you, Janice, for joining us. And our second guest is Jane Reid. And Jane and Janice are actually friends from like the past 17 years, was it? Or since you're 17? Yeah. And Jane is a user researcher, and I've known Jane since like 2015 when I first met, when I was doing some training for DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions. And she was previously a civil servant there, and she's been doing research work for like the past 20 years. So she's also very experienced. So we have combined like over 45 years of experience between Jane and Janice, which is great. And she's mainly been focusing on also, complex areas like homelessness, drugs, alcohol, and domestic abuse. And she has also initiated and led what she describes as one of her most complex pieces of research. So I'm just letting people in at the same time. One of the most complex, pieces of research that she's conducted, which is around when and what to ask about sex and gender on forms across the UK public sector. And this research has actually led many organizations to rethink whether or not they need the question, and some have also removed it as well. So thank you, Jane, for joining us back in the Design Feeling Fireside. So I will now pass the mic over to you, Jane and Janice. If you could maybe give us a quick context as to why we're gathering today. And then after we do that for a few minutes, I am going to break you out into little breakout rooms, like pair you up with a partner. And then we're going to have a quick, and you can basically have a quick chat with each other, and we're going to come back into the main room. Okay, cool. All right, Jane, Janice.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fab. I thought I was having a technical disaster there. So thank you everybody for coming along today. So just a bit of a recap, if you haven't listened to the podcast, about how we got this conversation started. So as Nareesh alluded to, I've been doing research and then user research for a long time. And yep, I've known Janice since I was 17. During that time of doing research, particularly user research, I was doing a lot of coaching and mentoring of new user researchers coming into work in government, because it's quite a culture shock to a lot of people. And through that process of helping people informally, I put a shout out on Twitter, most of them were asking me not about user research as a craft. They were asking me about how to cope with the job. And it was quite worrying, a lot of the things that I was hearing. People want to leave the profession. It was affecting their mental health. They weren't sleeping at night. Now, mental health is not an area that I'm trained in to give advice on that. What I can say is that no job is worth giving your mental health up for. So I got talking to Janice about, this is what I was hearing. What's the difference between me being a user researcher and all of these people feeling this way versus you being a therapist. And because at the time we discussed this, Janice wasn't working in the field of user research, so we started digging a bit deeper into the two professions and what's the difference between a user researcher and a therapist and what's the commonalities. And from that, we combine both practices, and we've designed a course to try and help both researchers and participants stay safe in these environments. And that's why we're here. So that conversation, you know, we've been talking to Narish, she invited us to the podcast, and it's great to get this topic on the agenda. So that's a brief sort of overview of how we've, you know, ended up here today, is to talk about that. And it'd be great to hear people's challenges, own experiences. Does it resonate? And yeah, happy to take any questions, you know, and obviously Janice will field any sort of more sort of anything sort of mental health, trauma related side of things, because it's really important that some things we talk about might trigger some people in that area, and that's needs facilitated by an expert. So yeah, we'll give both views, and really looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Great. Jen, did you want to add something to that while I create some breakout rooms?
Okay, so Jane has given a background into how we met and why we've taken this forward as an agenda. And really all that I want to say before the conversation comes up, when you get into breakout rooms, just have a think about yourselves. If you all are user researchers, I would just ask you to have a think about your most challenging moments in the room with your participants. Anything that's maybe stalled you in your process, anything that you found particularly difficult, any kind of we started talking about feelings, and I want to take you back to feelings. What does it feel like when things are going difficult, and get in touch with that, because that's really important. And it's lovely to meet you all.
Great. Thanks, Janice. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms. You'll have basically 2 minutes per person, so 4 minutes in total. So if you want to switch after 2 minutes, or if you want to just, you know, use the whole 4 minutes just to have conversation, it's entirely up to you. But you get 4 minutes in total. That's around 2 minutes per person. Any questions before we jump in for like a quick little chat? All good? Okay, I'm going to open up the rooms, and you should be able to see a button that says join room. But Jane and Janice, don't join the room. Just stay here. And yeah, we'll bring you back in after 4 minutes. I think Jean-Claude, are you able to join the room, or? Not sure. Maybe I'll move your partner to somewhere.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
I want to move. I want to move. I can't really join.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, I will observe. I will observe. Sorry.
No worries. Aileen, sorry, like Jean-Claude is on the move at the moment, so that's why your partner couldn't join.
Okay,
but we can have a chat. Like, tell us about, you know, what brings you here.
Oh well, okay. Sorry. Is it? Are you talking to me? Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. I was talking to Aileen, your partner in the room.
Oh, sorry.
Julia.
Oh, hi, sorry. I think the person that was with me in the room dropped out.
Oh, okay, no worries. That's fine. What I'll do is I'll maybe send Julia, Aileen, and John into a room then.
Okay.
And so Julia, you're in room 4, right?
Yes.
Room 1. So if you could maybe actually just chat here. Let's just chat here.
That's so
All right,
good.
talk to each other.
Okay.
What brings you here, Julia? Maybe do you want to get started?
Yes, so I'm working at a consultancy space, and I'm working with military veterans at the moment. And our consultancy is quite small. And I don't have that many senior people to rely on, so I was just hoping to hear from other people around the various strategies that they use for self-care when researching sensitive topics, because it's something that I've been coming up against over the last couple of weeks, having sessions with people that are highly emotive and noticing how that's affecting me.
Mm.
Sorry, I'm looking at the side because my cat's here demanding attention.
Your cat can join as well. Aileen, anything from your side?
So I head up a research team in Social Security Scotland. So a lot of our work, and I'm talking to clients, it's people have had lots of trauma. So even though we say just share what you feel comfortable with, and actually we don't need a lot of detail about the trauma, we're interested in maybe testing something, people do tell you a lot of their life stories. So pretty much most interviews, we hear a lot of trauma that people have gone through, which is quite challenging to deal with. So again, was just looking to see if there's other tips that I could be using, because I need to provide the support for everyone. So it's then how do I make sure I take care of myself so that I can then help support when everybody else is debriefing on me.
Rachel and Nicola, welcome. We're just having a quick little breakout chat at the moment. So feel free to join us if you want to, tell us what brings you here, like what are some of your challenges in terms of self-care for user researchers, if you want to share anything.
Yeah, sorry, I was actually just in a breakout room with Julie, and I had technical issues, my connection dropped.
No worries.
So yeah, so sorry about that. But I have to go back in the breakout room if hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, feel free to just share it here if you'd like, if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm actually in research operations, so I was really keen just to join the conversation today, just to get an idea, particularly with user researchers, sort of self-care, and I think it's important in the research operations space as well. So yeah, it's just keen to obviously hear other people's thoughts on it, and yeah, open up the discussion a bit more.
Great, thanks, Nicola. So yeah, we'll basically bring everyone back into the main room now, and we can have a bit of a chat about it. Hannah. Great, welcome back. Hopefully, I didn't cut off anyone mid-sentence. So, what are some of the challenges or questions or conversations you heard in your room from your partner? Would anyone like to share anything that they might have found interesting?
I can go on if nobody's
Go for it,
going. I think we had the same kind of reflection, even if we are not in the same industry. It's user research, I mean games, but I end up having sometimes players talking about their personal life or their addiction to games, actually, without me being prepared for it, because I have specific project on specific topics, and sometimes just it gets a bit out of hand. And we were talking about how difficult it is to sometimes detach yourself from their story and their issues, and how even subconsciously it can just stay with you even after work, or even if you don't want to think of it, or you're like, it's not my story, but it's just with you all the time. And we just found very hard to detach yourself, and we don't really have a way of actually not being attached to that story. So I don't know if you have some tools for that, but yeah, personally, I find this very difficult.
Any thoughts from Jane and Janice on that?
I could probably pick that up for you, Megan. You're speaking about working in an environment where you potentially wouldn't have expected to be faced with any challenges because you're working with games. However, what we do promote is that regardless of the arena you're working in, there is the potential for content to come up that can be quite traumatic and quite complex, that can potentially trigger you. Now, what we advise people to do is to do regular, what we call reflective practice. And that's whereby what you should be doing is when you do a round of research, or you've had time with this particular cohort, what you should do is reflect either with a peer or with someone else within your organisation. And what that does is that allows you and gives you permission to explore and talk openly about how you feel. And it's almost like if you don't do that, you're almost like a vessel. And if you keep going and you keep working in environments where you're hearing difficult stuff and it's having an effect on you, you will fill up, and you will keep filling up with all this really harmful stuff till one day you just pop. However, if you do self-reflection, what happens is as you're working along in your career, you're tipping out as you're going along, and it's almost like emptying out the vessel at regular intervals so that it keeps you safe. If there was anything that really triggered you where you felt you weren't moving on from it, that's when you need to listen to your body, listen to your emotions, listen to your feelings, and maybe take a step further in a direction where you want to seek further help. And one thing that I always tell people is, we are our clients, we are our users, because we have families, we have networks, and potentially what we hear in sessions can be happening in our lives. So there's the possibility that what content can do is trigger stuff that's already going on for you in your life. And that's really important to acknowledge that. Acknowledge whether you should be able to do that, be doing that work, and if not, be honest and open that you have a vulnerability around that, because it's best to be vulnerable, and there's nothing wrong with that, than actually put yourself in a place where you potentially could be harmed. So reflective practice is key to getting that sorted.
Thank you for that. And I think this is where it's nice to have that knowledge, but it's harder to practice it, I feel like.
It is, because when you're doing reflective practice, you really have to tap into feelings, exactly what Nareesh opened the webinar with. And sometimes it's difficult to do that, because sometimes when you open up feelings, we're quite scared to do it because we don't know how it's going to leave us. But one message I will give is that to open up feelings is actually the bravest thing you can do, and it's the most positive and proactive thing you can do. And vulnerability, exposing yourself to a bit of vulnerability, is actually really good because you learn from it, all given you've got the right supports in the background to take you through. But I would certainly promote reflection. Reflective practice is key. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Aileen, you just dropped a question in the chat. Did you want to talk about it?
So I guess what you'd mentioned, Janice, I do with my team, but the expectation from the team is that I don't need that. So I don't really know where I go then in order for me to then be able to do that other than in my own head, which is not always a great place to be.
Yeah, and that's really valid as well, Aileen, because if you're in a position where you're the line manager of user researchers and you're doing your one-to-ones with them because you're following a practice within your organisation that's caring for your staff, you're absolutely right. You're hearing all the content that they're bringing from all the sessions that they've been involved in, and it's almost like it's getting left at your doorstep. So again, that bottle fills up, but your bottle will fill up a lot quicker because you're taking on everyone else's content. So you'll be taking on all of your staff's content, what they're bringing, but also what will be coming through with all of that is all the different clients and all their different traumas, complexity. So it'll be total overload for you. So what I would say is that you need to flag that. You need to shout from the rooftops that you need support with this, because if you don't, there's the potential there, Aileen, that you potentially could burn out with all of this, because it's just too much. It's too much to hear. And the other thing that I would say as well, be very careful about what the user researchers are actually listening to within the context of their sessions. Because a lot of the time what user researchers seem to think is that they can't say, stop, I don't need to hear this, it's not relevant for today. So being empaths and being lovely people, what they tend to do is they tend to open themselves up, listen to all the stuff that they don't really need to hear. So within our training, what we do is we can teach people how to sensitively, appropriately and professionally close difficult situations down for two purposes. And the main purpose is so that we don't overwhelm the participant, because if we let a participant open up their trauma, we're running the risk of them getting triggered back into it. Now, if you're with someone who's gone through trauma and you trigger them back into something, that's quite dangerous, because then they can start dissociating, they can start doing things that would really frighten the life out of a user researcher who doesn't know what's going on. So it's crucial that user researchers know what they need to hear, and when it crosses that boundary whereby they need to close it down. And there's ways you can close it down, and there's ways you can refer on that people, user researchers, need to know. But for yourself, you really need to get something in place, A, to protect you, and B, to get the user researchers within your team well equipped with the interview and techniques and skills that they can close things down when they have to. So that's sort of twofold, I would say, for you to maybe take forward.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Jane, you had to.
Yeah, it's just to add to Aileen's question and the response. You mentioned, Aileen, before your question when you were just playing back something about the session, about that opening question. You know, tell us as much or as little as you feel comfortable with. That question is coming up a lot, and it openings, you know, it can open up a can of worms. So a bit like the sex and gender question, do we need to ask it? What I've been reflecting in this since we delivered a course last week. Now, I think it's a question we have to look at, all of us, because we ask it as a kind of opener, an icebreaker, ease them in, tell us your story. How did you get here to, you know, even using this game, whatever it is. But that question in itself, I'm actually questioning the question, because we either need to know the information or we don't. And therefore, we are inviting that person to tell us whatever they want to tell us. Now, if it's not relevant to the objectives of the research, I think it's worth us relooking at that question. And also at the start, laying the context and the boundaries with the participant, because if you're going into a session as a participant also, I've done a lot of work in the space of death. People are worried about coming along, and they're worried about what we're going to ask them, and they're worried that they might have to go into details that they don't want to. So a question like that also can take the wind out their sails as well, and upset them and potentially re-traumatize them, as well as they just do off the go, and then it makes it really difficult for us as user researchers to get that back on track. It can actually sometimes, you know, you have to end up stopping the interview. So I think I'm putting that out there to all of us. Think about that question and what it can potentially expose us to, and how we're going to deal with the things they'll tell us, and set some context and boundaries, and maybe even say to people, like, if you know, it can be hard to separate the trauma from the user research. However, if you are doing research that is straying right into trauma, then we need to ask ourselves, are we the right people to be doing that research? And I would actually say in a lot of cases we're not. You need an expert like Janice in the room. I think somebody also signed up to the course today, you know, who's a social workers who do design there. So there's a question about putting us in those situations. And a lot of the time we don't have to, you know, go and hear all of the details. But that open question is, you know, can really take the wind out their sails and ours. So I think that's something for us to look at. That question, you know, this is the starter of the session, and how do you get back from there, you know, and continue. So it's a challenge to myself, all of us, I would think. Yeah.
Helena, did you want to pick up your question?
Yeah, I think it's a continuation of the, I guess, the answers and the questions. So I think I take the point about you kind of, is it always necessary? I think in my current situation is that I find that it is actually necessary to do some of this research. So, for example, talking to people who have an overeating disorder, trying to understand kind of what situations that comes up in, and so that we can better tailor the product that we're building to them. So, sorry, lost my train of thought. I'm just curious about the best, just kind of the best ways to respond and handle when people, because that will inevitably, like, people will say stuff. And I use the word trauma, maybe it's the wrong word, like, but people will say stuff that is kind of, they'll share how it's affecting them negatively. And I'm always I find that I respond differently depending on the time of day, what, if it's my first interview or third. And I really have like a range of how I might respond, from like trying to be more empathetic, which is probably almost steering too much into a therapist, to being very much a robot. And I'm just curious kind of how, even maybe if you talk about like how exactly you would close down a situation like that, I'd be curious to hear how you'd respond.
I think that probably is a situation where you're going to have to hear trauma, and you're going to have to hear a bit more if you're designing a service with someone with an eating disorder, because eating disorders are about coping strategies for a potential traumatic experience or something difficult that's happened in somebody's life. So you probably have to explore a bit of why people are using that behaviour. That's where it would come in. Are you the right person to do that work, or do you have to get an organisation to work hand in hand with you? Because we know there are a lot of eating disorder organisations out there who give support, confidential sort of therapeutic support to people who self-harm, and eating disorder is a form of self-harm. So I think that would be something whereby you should maybe tap into, and maybe get someone on board with you, to provide a bit of support, because you will potentially hear other things. And again, for yourself, it's about yourself. You need to look after you in these situations as well, because if you're doing back-to-back sessions, you're not giving yourself time to process what you've heard before you're jumping into the next one. And that can be really dangerous for you. And it was really interesting what you said around, it depends what time of the day it is when I do the session, because when I was doing a lot of therapy, that's really relevant as well, because if it's first thing in the morning, you're more alert, you haven't heard anything yet of the day, but when it maybe gets to afternoon, you've heard a whole host of trauma, and at that point you might zone out, you might not be able to take anymore, and that's normal. So therefore, when you get to that point and you're not being able to digest and take more in, then how useful is the session, and how useful is the findings from the session, because they're based on you not being in that really safe place yourself to actually do it. So that's something else that can be a challenge. But working with that, regardless of whether you've got supports there, you need supports in place for yourself as well. And that can be reflective practice as a starting point. And if you're tapped into other organisations who are providing this support, you will probably find there'll be therapists there who maybe offer some kind of a group, kind of a maybe sessions whereby they could maybe offer the team that are going in maybe some group sort of reflective practice sessions or something, and get the help from the professionals. Yep. But have a think about what you're doing and whether you should really be hearing all of that.
Janice, Helena's question also, she's asking, I don't know if you can see the chat. So she's asking also about getting the balance to how she responds to, when she hears that content, from trying to comfort the people, which is bad, she's saying, or validating their experience, versus responding like a robot and just saying to people that's interesting. So maybe if touch on the way to close that down, and what comes up for us a lot, I think it'd be really helpful to Helena to hear how you actually politely redirect that or bring it back.
Yeah, it's really quite simple, because what goes on in a relationship with two people, it can be a therapeutic relationship, or it can be a user research relationship with the moderator and the participant. So that's a relationship that's based on trust, and it's a relationship where information is getting shared about the participant. Now, when you're in a setting like that, feelings can come over you that are quite unexpected. And you could maybe feel that, you've heard too much, or you maybe feel silenced, you maybe feel that you just can't hear anymore. And a lot of the time when those feelings come over you as a user researcher, it's because the participant's feeling them as well. And that's called transference. So it's almost like this sort of two-way things goes on, and it's the relationship within the context. Now, if any strong feelings come over you, there's something going on in that relationship, and there's something going on either for you, the participant, or both of you. If it happens, act on it. Just stop what you're doing, have a bit of silence, because silence is good. Reflect on how you're feeling, and whatever that feeling is that's going on for you, act on it with your response. So if you feel silenced, if you feel you've heard too much, that's telling you that there's something going on in that relationship, that too much is going on. And what you could potentially give back there is something just polite. Thank you for your time today. I think we can close it at that. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Are you okay to end? And leave it at that. There's other ways that you can close things down by saying, I'm hearing what you're telling me. However, I am not the right person to give you support on that. I have a list here of who I can refer you to, and you give the person, sign the person on, basically. Be honest in the session if you're not the right person to hear the content, because what you'll find is the participant or the client or the user, they're always grateful for honesty.
I think one of the things I would add to that, Janice, that you've commonly also we tell people is also acknowledging to the person how difficult it must have been for them to share that with you, and and acknowledging that first to soften it a bit, and then say, and it is okay to say, I'm not the right person to be able to give you advice in that, and just make sure maybe they want to pause the interview and come back, but acknowledging it, how hard it is for them to share it, etc. And then gently, if you have to close it thereafter.
If that's the feeling that's going on in the session. If you feel that's going on in the session, then give that back. It's almost like you're just placing it back to the participant. But there will be occasion when people don't find it difficult to share their trauma with you because it's something that they've did quite commonly for years, maybe, because maybe you could have somebody within your session who has had to share their experiences through accessing other services, or they've accessed therapy. They're very kind of grounded with their experiences, whereby you do find a lot of people who will share and they don't actually find it difficult, but you might find it difficult. Talking about self-harm and talking about eating disorders, and I'll share this with you, and I hope everybody's okay with it, but I worked a lot with self-harm, and I worked a lot with eating disorders, and I've worked a lot with cutting, clients who have cut. Now, what I found quite a lot when I worked with people who self-harmed, they wanted to show me the depth of what was going on for them. So quite often I could be in a session with clients who cut, and for them just to let me know what was going on for them, they would maybe say, look at my arm. And that's quite common. Now, that isn't difficult for that person to show me that, but it was difficult for me to see it. And I would feel the difficultness around me, and I knew it was me that found that difficult. So in a situation like that, what you would give back is you would say, thank you for letting me see that. However, you can put your sleeve back down. It's okay, you don't need to share that with me, and then move on. So it's about getting in touch with what's going on in the room, because quite often people will do things and they will show you things that you don't need to see. But that can be a shock for some people as well. And it's almost like the unexpected can happen no matter what you're working with. And we're talking about gaming here. And who would think that you'd get into work doing research with gaming and you would hear some really difficult content, but you can. You absolutely can. It's being prepared for anything that comes up. And that's why we go back to the basics of good, solid interviewing techniques, the basics of confidence with people, the basics of knowing that you can hold that person, but you can also end it safely, professionally, and let them go, and also be okay with yourself for doing that. Yeah.
Great. We probably have time for 2 more questions, and the next one from Michelle on the chat. Michelle, did you want to pick that up? And then we'll move on to Dominica.
Thanks, Naresh. And I have to say thank you. This is such an important conversation. So thanks, everyone. My question that came up in our kind of little one-on-one chat was just around that reliving of the experience of you have the interview, and often during the interview you're very much sort of caught up in the interview and responding and having the conversation, and then sometimes you're then doing a transcription process where you're then having to listen to the interview and relive it again, and then you move into an analysis process where again you're going through that. And I was wondering if there are any tips on how to manage that sort of very repetitive of nature of listening and reliving through the same thing again and again when that thing has been quite difficult in the first place.
And that's the problem. You've just nailed the problem. That's why we have to challenge this, and that's why we have to do something about it, because you do hear it repetitively, and the danger of hearing repetitive trauma can put you at risk of developing vicarious trauma. And as a therapist, we have an ethical sort of protocol whereby we have to have clinical supervision, and that clinical supervision protects us from vicarious trauma. It allows us to explore what's going on, and keeps us safe. User researchers don't have that, but they hear the same traumatic content and they hear it repetitively. Albeit there's a bit of difference with the therapist will go deeper because they're trained to go deeper, they can go deeper. The user researcher sometimes has to go a bit deeper, and that's when you need to consider all these other kind of tools whereby you bring people in to help you from organisations. And this is where I challenge the 5 whys, the 5 whys of user research, because I don't think it necessarily sits. Because if you go in with why, you're going to the core, aren't you? And you don't necessarily have to go to the core. But if that's what's happening for you just now, you're hearing repetitive trauma, then again, it's reflective practice. Reflect as well before you get into the sessions. Reflect about what you potentially might hear. Reflect about how you would deal with it. Practice what your answers would be. And I remember years ago, somebody telling me, when you go for an interview, sit in front of a mirror, give yourself a list of questions, answer them, and watch yourself answering them, and you'll get the job. And I did that, and I always got the job. And it's almost the same here. Get the list of things that maybe could come up for you. Practice what you would say, and explore it before you go in. Explore it after you come out, and explore it regularly through self-reflection. But you're right, that you've hit the nail on the head. That's why it's a problem.
And I think because your question is, you're focusing also on the analysis part and seeing it and hearing it again, because we do go out and deliberately recruit vulnerable people, and we pick out the best video clips, to get our stakeholders to sit up and take notice, because so we're also imparting it on them. You pick the most powerful quotes, the most powerful footage, all of that. And again, it's back to that preparation, preparing for it, running that through your ethics checklist to see, are we prepared for this? Right along that whole user research process, and what steps do we need to put in place in order to manage that, as Janice has touched on. Nareesh, I was trying to pop, we designed a sketch that articulates exactly what you're talking about, Michelle. I was trying to paste it into the chat, but I don't seem to be able to do that. See if I stick it in our LinkedIn chat, can you?
Yeah, or I could just share it in the design feeling group on LinkedIn.
Oh yes, do that. I can give you it afterwards then. I'll pop it in our chat now, so I don't forget. Yep, okay. And again, it's about preparing others who are involved in that process, Michelle, that if they're coming to do the joint analysis with you, but they maybe haven't been in the research sessions, forewarning them, they might not be the right thing for them to be involved in that. So I think, as Janice touched on, look at the topic, know yourself, is this topic, can I, am I okay to deal with this just now? And put in place measures to try and help that. I've worked with lots of organisations over the years to do user research where we haven't been the right people to do it. Mental health organisations, drugs and alcohol support groups, we did it with them, and we took a step back at key points where they collected the insight by proxy for us, and it was the right thing to do. So it's just about making the ethics checklist. It all goes back to that makes you question all these things.
And just quickly, Michelle, challenge the people that are laying the expectation that you should be doing this without support. Challenge them, give them the evidence, let them see what happens. And there's lots of evidence within our website and within different sort of blog posts and things that we've put out. Get it in front of them and be the voice for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you
my
both
question.
so much.
Thanks, Mitchell. My question was around, how do you get leadership to care about this? Especially people who are like, pretty far away from what happens on the ground, and also in corporate as well, in the corporate world, a lot of leaders, people don't get to have that face-to-face with people, like real humans on the ground.
I was reading something the other day actually, and it was outlining the cost of the businesses lose to mental health. And it's phenomenal, the amount of days lost through sickness, through burnout, etc. And sometimes that's the type of thing that, leaders take notice of. It's in their interest to have their staff well, as part of looking after them and health and safety and all of that type of stuff. So it's just about starting that conversation. I don't think people have ignored us all as a community deliberately. They just haven't thought that this happens when you're designing a game or designing a book, booking an appointment to see your GP. It's everything's shifted, but COVID, I think, is bringing that more to the fore. That is more people are speaking about it. But yeah, I was trying to dig out. I read it. I can't remember where I've seen it, but if I find it, I'll send it along. And it was quite, start statistics about the cost to everybody if you don't put in the support in place. A lot of places we're finding have it. So see our big government departments, for example, they will have like you can get access to counsellors and stuff. A lot of people don't know it or they don't use it either. So again, it's about being comfortable knowing that you need support and, and being comfortable asking for help, and that environment needs to be created, doesn't it? To allow you to do that.
I think that's also related to Clarissa's question just then around budget-wise. How do you convince a team it's worth getting that support? Yeah,
so if you're in the public sector, I would be very surprised if there wasn't some sort of support there already. I worked in the public sector for 31 years, and every department I worked in have you can get access to counselling because they want you back at work. Let's face it, you're off sick for so many days in 6 months and they're out chapping your door to see what's wrong with you and they want you back. And as part of that, so I would look first to see if there actually is something already available and see if you can tap into that. But again, it goes back to should you be exposed to it in the first place? And I think we're putting ourselves in a lot of situations that we don't need to be in. And I'll go back to that question again, share as much or as little as you like, but then further down the line, we get them to share it and then we want them to close it down. So there's something about all of that as well, just having the confidence to handle that, because if you're asking it, it's high likelihood it's going to come up, yeah.
Great. Hopefully that answers some of your questions, Clarissa. So we'll move on to our last question for the day, Dominica, and then we'll, in like around 4 or 5 minutes time, we'll start wrapping up. So Dominica.
Yeah, thanks. I actually decided to ask a different question that I was originally going to. I think the biggest is quite validating in a way because we already have quite a few of those processes in place. But the biggest challenge that I still find is, because we're part of a bigger design team and we've got service designers working alongside that, obviously, there is still, again, that lack of understanding of assumptions, partly, because of the timelines of the projects that, ethics and also safeguarding is something that user researchers do. It's, user researchers fill the checklist, like ethics is just, part of user research, and same for like trauma-informed practice. Even though service designers are interested in it, it's like, okay, but that's user research, and then we do our things. So sometimes it's quite difficult to kind of communicate that actually, no, it's part of our practice and we have to safeguard ourselves and everyone else. And in the workshops as well, it's not just interviewing where kind of those things come in. So I don't know what's been your experience with that, with having those conversations around it's everyone's responsibility, not just something that researchers do.
We spoke about that on the podcast, and when I first started user research, everything hinged on us. Everything was on our shoulders. They looked to us for all the answers, and by God, if we didn't have them, you know, you had a target in your back almost. I've seen a shift away from that, and it's like, again, and I don't know if you're in Scottish Government or not, Dominica, but that the approach they've got to sense making is a good approach. So having that team immersed in the problem all the way through, having them involved in analysis, etc., can help. And it's that shared ownership that user research is only one part of the solution. You need the business analysis, you need the technical appraisal. So just communicating that it's only one part of the story and it's an incomplete story. So to make the right decisions, it's a team. Has to bring all their expertise. That's why we've got them. So focusing on that really helps. And also, if the particular piece of research you feel you're going to be exposed in that, as are the service designers running workshops, and it's asking you all these questions, then you have to put it up to your ethics committee, who will decide should this take place and are the right things in place, you know, for it, for to be support. Only twice in my career have I had to do that, and it was up to the Scottish Government Ethics Committee. So make use of these things. That's what they're there for. But certainly that team articulating to people, you're only bringing one part of the story here, and it's a team problem solving, a team articulating the problem, etc. It's not just the user researcher's shoulders.
Yeah, I think it's that question of ownership, right? Who
yes,
and I think at the moment it's very much user researchers still in the government.
Go through your ethics checklist as a team at the start of the research project. As
That's
a team,
really missing, I think.
And it's missing everywhere, Dominica. Some people don't even have an ethics checklist in place, we're finding, and we're all going out again because with the pressure, the time, the cycles, you know, so we're cutting corners, you could see in a lot of places, and it's detrimental to all of us. Yeah.
Great. Does that answer your question, Dominica?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. Let me just quickly recap some of the things that I've kind of picked up from here. There's definitely this theme around, you know, taking time out for this reflective practice, the self-reflection that happens within yourself. But then there seems like there's a need to also be proactive about getting support if there's no support, because you can't just do everything by yourself, right? It doesn't matter how much self-reflection you do. If you don't have the right support, then you're gonna consistently come up with those issues. And also around just letting go of that, having to have the ownership of everything, having to solve all the problems, and sharing that ownership with the wider team seems to probably also let go of some of that pressure as well. Jane and Janice, any final thoughts or reflection from you?
I would just say it's great that everybody's talking about it and keep talking about it. You know, share our podcast as well, and it might help. I mean, we thank Nareesh for giving us the platform, you know, as well to talk about it. Yeah, and raise your concerns. And if you've got any, I would really, that ethics process, because it can be backlash for everybody, including those at the very top. So you can almost use that as your kind of, we should be using it anyway, but you can use it maybe more as a lever to say, I would start looking at that as a matter of urgency. The ethics checklist. If you don't have one, get one in place. Yeah.
Janice, anything from your side?
Yeah, just quickly from me, put yourself as priority of importance in the work that you're doing, not necessarily the user, and look after yourself, because it's really important that you do. And it's lovely to have you all, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. And how can people find you? I have posted some of your LinkedIn links online in the chat. How would you like people to follow up on this chat if, you know, get in touch with you or something like that?
we've got an email. I'll put in an email box or like that if they want to connect in LinkedIn. I think you've put the links in there. Then by all means do so. If you want a more formal chat and are interested in potentially the training and stuff, then just email us. Whatever suits you really. We're on social media, and yeah, and I'll just put that in there. And please don't forget to listen to the full interview episode that was launched last week. Some really good nuggets of wisdom there, and hopefully you can join us for the next fireside in a fortnight's time. And yeah, thank you so much for spending an hour with us, and we'll see you next time.